Hello, my friends. Today, I'd like to talk to you about something I get a lot of questions about and think it's a little unclear in conventional medicine, and that's intestinal parasite infections. Let's talk about parasites, what they are, how they affect your health, and how you might know if you have one, and more importantly, what to do about it. A parasite is an organism that lives and feeds off other organisms, and parasites are tiny, which makes them particularly hard to detect. For many people, it really feels scary. The first question I often get asked when someone finds out they have a parasite is, how in the world could I have even gotten this? We feel like it's something we can only get from foreign places. But we live in an international world, and really the food you get right at your grocery store can and often does have parasites living in it. Parasites living in food is the most common way to get them. The most common way to contract a parasite is from the food we eat, particularly produce and undercooked meats. We do not live in an isolated world. Our food comes from all over the world, so you don't have to go to a tropical place to get a parasite because our food supply is international. Your pineapples may come from Costa Rica, your strawberries from Mexico or Brazil. You don't have to travel somewhere to get a parasite like Giardia or Blastocystis hominis. You can get them right here in the grocery store. Another place we can commonly contract parasites are lakes and creeks or other bodies of water. If you travel internationally, you can come in contact with them from contaminated water in other countries and even sometimes tap water in the US. There are also certain things that can set you up to be more likely to get a parasite. And one of those things is a weakened immune system. Similar to other infections like Lyme disease or Epstein-Barr, when you have a weakened immune system, you can also be more likely to be affected by a parasite. Another thing I see very commonly is a co-infection with H. pylori. So what happens here is that the H. pylori damages the parietal cells of our stomach, which is where we produce stomach acid. So when you have H. pylori, it really likes to live in a more alkaline environment. That's a more basic environment. And it's damaging those parietal cells to make it more optimal for the environment it likes to live in. But when that happens, we also get something called hypochlorhydria, which is low stomach acid. And when you get this low stomach acid, when you're eating, you're not breaking food down the way you should. You don't have enough stomach acid to really digest properly. And with this decrease of stomach acid, you don't always dissolve the eggs or the larvae of the parasite. And our bodies are designed to be able to do this. So we're not really getting that full acidic environment to be able to break things down in the way we're intended, the way we're made to because of this lower stomach acid. To make it more complicated, another way many people are treated when they're having an upset stomach is a proton pump inhibitor, which also reduces stomach acid. And they're usually prescribed to reduce the pain you feel if you have reflux. The idea of this is so that there's not as much stomach acid going into the esophagus, because we often have the flap of our esophagus going up and creating that burning in the esophagus. And that's where we're getting the pain. But what it actually does is decrease the stomach acid in your actual stomach, which can lead to some of these problems because we're not getting enough stomach acid to break things down the way we're intended to, which can be another thing that can set you up to be more likely to get a parasite. And unfortunately, once a person gets a parasite, it's easy to pass along. So we're passing it from one person to the next person. If you don't wash your hands in the restroom, you can easily pass these tiny eggs onto anything you touch, including door handles, salt shakers, phones, or anything else you touch. So you see again that we don't have to be living in a foreign place. It's just something that we have to think about and take into account. When you're having certain symptoms, parasites are often missed in the conventional space because, again, they're so tiny and they're often thought of as having a more acute symptoms. If you're having severe diarrhea, if you've been traveling and come back with a severe infection, then a parasite comes to mind. But sometimes it's not just severe symptoms. You can have IBS symptoms like diarrhea, constipation. You can have bloating, where we rule out things like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. You may get a scope to rule out some more serious infections, but then you're just stuck with this label of IBS. And IBS is often a diagnosis of exclusion rather than digging into what's going on underneath. And what happens is you're often just given a medication to cover up these symptoms. So you might be given antispasmodics or acid blockers, which can lead to more of a problem like we talked about. If you have constipation, you maybe give laxatives, or bloating, you may be giving Gas-X, which are really just doing things to manage your symptoms. They're never really getting to that underlying cause of why you're getting these symptoms and what's going on. And even if parasites are thought of in the conventional space, they're not often found because they actually have a life cycle. They can rotate between dormant and active phases, meaning that the technician reading the test won't always be able to see the parasite in the stool. To identify the parasite in a conventional stool sample, they must contain a live parasite, and the parasite must remain alive in the transit to the lab so the technician can actually see it moving. So while certain tests can be useful, it may not be able to identify a dormant parasite and can lead to a high number of false negatives. Another thing that can be tricky in the diagnosis of a parasite infection is that they can also cause energy and mood issues, which can really be a three-dimensional diagnosis. Sometimes we just bucket gut infections to the gut and mood infections to psychiatric things, and you may end up with an antidepressant instead of something that's treating your parasite in your gut. We need to be able to put all of these pieces together and not look at it one-dimensionally, because we want to really connect all these dots. Sometimes some of these mood issues, some of these chronic fatigue issues can actually come back to something like a parasite in your gut. And when we can heal that, we can heal all the other symptoms too. And I actually even see this with headaches. So when I'm working with people with headaches and we find some of these underlying gut issues, and a parasite can be a big one, once we really heal that, we can actually get the headaches to go away. So let's move on to some common symptoms of a parasite. Well, one thing for sure is bloating. So if you feel like you're bloating up, if you're bloating after meals, this could be definitely a sign of a parasite. You can have this happen for many different underlying infections of the gut. And that's what's really great about a DNA technology stool test. It can really look at all of the microbes in the gut. We're looking at things like parasites, candida, we're looking at SIBO and different overgrowth and undergrowth even. So we can really get to the root of what's going on. We can really specifically look to treat that, because you can be getting bloating for different reasons, but one of those could definitely be from a parasite. Brain fog is another thing people really start to develop when you have a parasite. You may feel like you're not as sharp, or you're just feeling foggy all the time. You can have this chronic brain fog, and that can definitely be a sign. You could also have fatigue, and fatigue is really hard to identify. Another reason fatigue can happen is because you have iron deficiency anemia from having a parasite, which is due to blood loss that's stolen from the parasite and the parasite's consumption of blood tissue. And that's really an interesting one, because many people feel hungry all the time, that they're never really satiated after the meal. And this can actually happen in combination with weight loss. So if you're feeling like you're losing weight, but you're hungry all the time, this could be a signal of a parasite. These things are alive and they're feeding at the same time as their hosts. So they can cause this extreme hunger where you feel like even after you're done eating, you just still feel hungry. So that can be another thing to clue you in to the possibility of a parasite. You can also have symptoms like nausea, gas, and even some people have reduced hunger. I know, I just said you can be more hungry too, but we're all unique and everyone's symptoms can be a little bit different. Your symptoms can often look like IBS symptoms coming from a parasite. You may also experience joint pain or aching joints because parasites can evade the joint. They can also excrete toxins that can cause inflammation, negatively impacting the body's ability to move and function, because parasites can actually also alter your circadian rhythm. And therefore, they can have effects on your sleep because they can be even more active at night. You would never associate that you're not sleeping well with the fact that you could have a parasite. Another interesting thing is that also become more active during a full moon. So if you notice that there's a full moon and you can't sleep as well, that's another thing to clue you in that there may be something else underlying going on. Anal itching is another common symptom of a parasite that can clue you into more specifically looking into that. We can also see skin issues like hives, rosacea, eczema, and other things on your skin. Parasites can be more common in people with thyroid dysfunction and autoimmune disease. And I even, like I said, have seen chronic headaches and migraines go away once we clear the parasite. There's so much controversy over whether we can live with parasites. I've had a gastroenterologist tell people I'm working with, parasites live in us. It's fine. It's not something we need to treat. But if you're having symptoms, as we talked about, it's affecting your life. You're getting inflammation, often even in other body parts, because your body's fighting off these parasites. So it's definitely something you do want to address and look into and don't want to live with. We don't want to live with any of these symptoms that are causing us a lower quality of life. So it's something that, depending on the person, we definitely need to treat. And some parasites are more virulent than others. I'm not going to get into the different types. There's different types of parasites, and I think that would maybe bore you. So I don't want to go back to all of the history. But when we do testing, we see that some people have more virulent symptoms from different parasites than others. So it's really important to get the testing done to check if you're having symptoms. And like I said, we do a DNA stool test, which has a higher sensitivity than the standard stool test that I was talking about earlier. We can look at all the digestive functions in this test. We can see your secretory IgA, which has to do with your immune system at your gut lining, and see if the parasite is affecting the lining of your gut and your immune system there. We can look at calprotectin, which is an inflammation marker. And sometimes when people have had parasites for a long time, they can start to see a rise of calprotectin because you're starting to get this inflammation dynamic. So if this sounds like you can start doing things to try to starve the parasite out of your diet. Intestinal parasites attach themselves to our intestinal walls. So we want to try to be a bad host. We want to take away their food supply. Eating a diet high in nutrients and lower in refined and processed foods can be a great place to start. Eliminating sugar can help starve them out, and also adding fiber helps bowel movements, which can be really helpful in getting your digestive system into an optimal place to excrete things. You can also combine probiotics with nutrient-dense rich food to strengthen your immune system and help eliminate the parasites from your body. You can add things like raw garlic, which releases a compound called alicillin, which can help kill existing eggs and prevent female parasites from laying more eggs. Or coconut oil, which contains caprylic acid, which is a short chain fatty acid that can stop parasites from growing. And vitamin C and zinc can also support your immune system. So you want to make sure that you're strengthening your immune system at the same time you're treating. And while diet isn't often a great place to start, I often see people need additional help with herbs when it comes to treating parasites. Keep in mind that no herb can treat just one organism, but we want to try to look at things that are antiparasitic. And black walnut and wormwood are particularly potent antiparasitic agents. They've been used in traditional cultures for ages. And in general, tannins are also quite antiparasitic. We want to think about things like barks and twigs and limbs that have a lot of tannins in them. The other thing you have to be more mindful of when treating a parasite is that, again, parasites are living things. They actually have life cycles. So we want to make sure that we're spending enough time with the parasite treatment and that treating it in the right pattern to catch the life cycle. You often see people doing a 7-day parasite cleanse and think, okay, I did the cleanse, I'm done. But if you're not catching the active phase, then you may not be killing the parasite because they actually do go through a protective phase in their life cycle. You want to spread your treatments out over a period of time to actually make sure that you're catching them in that life cycle. And that is an important piece of treatment when it comes to treating parasites. If you miss the right phase of the life cycle, you may end up in this pattern where you just can't seem to catch it and start to feel better. Another thing I want to make sure that people are careful of, because I see this all the time, is that they're coming in saying they've heard a lot about parasites because people are finally talking more about them and we're getting information out there. But then they get nervous that they could have a parasite and they just start doing a parasite cleanse. And I don't think that's a good idea either, because as I mentioned earlier, the herbs aren't specific for individual organisms. While we can pick some specific herbs like black walnut and wormwood, which are more likely to be active against a parasite, they can also wipe out other organisms in your microbiome. And when we're treating a parasite, we can potentially be wiping other things out. So if you don't actually have a parasite infection, then you could be throwing your microbiome off in a different way and actually potentially doing more damage than good. I had someone come into my office recently who actually had just done a parasite cleanse. We had treated the parasite and she was feeling so much better. And she asked, should I just do this a few times a year to make sure I don't get another one? And my answer was no, because again, if you had the parasite, it would be helpful. We know we want to treat and that your symptoms would feel better, but you also have the potential of wiping out your good bacteria. And we really need that too. So we don't want to just treat things without a reason. And I think sometimes there's people out there just encouraging some of this blanket treatment. But unless you know that you have it, I don't encourage you just to treat without knowing. Everything has consequences. So, going back to the basics and starting with diet is a great place to start. If some of these symptoms do sound familiar, then I recommend finding a practitioner like myself or someone you trust that will run you a DNA stool test. And then you can actually see what's going on in your microbiome. You can look at all of the organisms and your good bacteria, your overgrowth, if you have a parasite, candida, and put all the pieces together. And someone can give you a good, clear roadmap for treatment to get you feeling better. You can start with just taking a look at the symptoms, see what you have going on, and know it's more common than we think. I hope you found this information helpful. Have a great day.